Dear colleagues, I have the great pleasure to chair today another session of the Channels of Digital Scholarship seminar and to welcome you for this session devoted to hate speech online, which is unfortunately a momentous hot topic right now. With the rise of social media platforms and anonymous online interactions, the internet has also become a breeding ground for hate speech. Hate speech online refers to any form of communication that belittles, dehumanizes, or supports violence against individuals or groups based on attributes such as race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or ethnicity. One key factor that has enabled the spread of hate speech online is the anonymity that the internet provides. Online platforms often allow users to create accounts without revealing their real identities, providing them with a shield of anonymity. This lack of accountability makes it easier for individuals to post hateful content without fear of immediate consequences, which leads to an increase in harmful online behavior. Additionally, the viral nature of social media ensures that such content can spread rapidly, reaching millions of people across the globe, often without any form of censorship or regulation. One of the most significant consequences of hate speech online is the emotional and psychological harm inflicted on victims. In addition to its psychological impacts, hate speech online can also undermine the integrity of democratic discourse. When online platforms are overwhelmed with harmful rhetoric, it makes it harder for individuals to engage in constructive dialogue. I would like to thank our two keynote speakers for today's session, Anna Terzi from Stockholm University and Professor Johannes Angermuller from Open University. I will give you some information about the format of the session. We will listen to our first speaker, Anna Terzi. After her presentation, you will be able to react and ask her questions. Afterwards, we will listen to our second speaker, Johannes Angermuller. His paper will be followed by your questions. During this Zoom session, I will ask you to mute your microphones during the talks. You could switch them on again if you want to ask questions later on. And also you will be able to ask questions either by raising your virtual hands or by typing your questions in the chat window. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Anna Terzi. She is a PhD student in Italian linguistics at Stockholm University. She studies the evolution of Italian political discourse over the last 2 decades. For her presentation today, she will focus on some discourse markers of hate speech she identified in radio interactions about the March 2020 lockdown in Italy during the COVID pandemic. The title of her paper today is The Hate Pandemic, the Role of Discourse Markers in the Creation of Hate Speech in Italy. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Grégoire, for this introduction, and especially thank you for letting me be part of such an stimulating, I hope, dialogue. And I think it's also very well needed to be talking about such a relevant and contemporary topic, even in our academic field. So now I will try to share my screen. Let's see if I have good technological abilities also. This one. Okay.
Good.
Hopefully you see my screen.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure. Perfect.
Okay. From Marian. Let me just adjust. Like this. Perfect. So, as Grégoire said, the title of my project is The Hate Pandemic. My main objective was to study the creation of hate speech and its presence in the Italian language And most of all, I wanted to study the role of discourse markers in building this type of hateful discourses. In order to do this, I decided to focus on the discourses that were produced in a radio show that, at least in Italy, is very well known for its essence of being politically incorrect. And I studied the discourses that were pronounced during the second week of March 2020, period during which Italy was put in a lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reason why I decided to focus on this specific time frame is based on the fact that I was expecting a higher amount of hate speech acts or hate crimes that were produced as a reaction made by the Italian population in respect to this event that is socially, politically, and historically very turbulent. So before moving to the highlight of my presentation, I would just like to tell you the reason why I decided to focus on the concept of hate speech. And for doing this, we should go back to last year when I was developing my theoretical background on my PhD project on political discourses. In this case, I was encountering different definitions in respect to the hate speech phenomenon. And for me, they appeared very divergent, somewhat ambiguous. And for sure, this can be understood if we think that this concept can be approached from different theoretical perspectives, with different research questions, and by applying different methodological strategies. Today, I will not list all the definitions that I have encountered in my research. I will just mention 3 of them that for me are especially relevant because I think that they can portray the issue that we are facing in respect to finding a definition that fully and in-depth grasps the numerous facets that can be linked to this phenomenon. So first of all, I would like to mention the definition that has been provided by the European Commission against Racism and Intolerance, which was proposed in 2015, and it is still valid today. It is the definition that has gained the highest recognition, and nonetheless, there are some aspects that have received some critique. First of all, we have in the first sentence the use of one or more particular forms of expression. For me, as a linguist, this is a bit vague because which type of forms of expression are we referring to? Is it language, words? Is it gestures? Is it behavior? Is it symbols, images, and so on? We have also some issues with the listing of hate acts, harassment, insult, negative stereotyping, stigmatization, and threat of person or group of people with specific characteristics. These hateful acts appear almost at the same level. So we are left with one main question mark. Should they be considered in the same way? Should they be seen as having the same impact across all audiences? And therefore, should they be judged and punished in the same way? Then, given that I'm coming from the field of linguistics, and especially concerning the Italian linguistics, I decided to focus on Bianchi's conceptualization. And already from the first sentence, we can see that this is a definition that has been provided by a linguist, because she is approaching the concept of hate speech from a semiotical perspective. She is defining each type of expressive form that she considers when analyzing a hate speech act. And she's referring both to parole e frasi, so words and sentences, but she is also considering aspects such as images, symbols, gestures, behaviors, and so on. But we have also some issues in this aspect because we don't know if words and sentences have the same impact as images, gestures, across all the audiences. Are certain forms of expressions more useful for a specific type of audience, or do they have the same impact? And we have also the word storicamente, so historically. So a person who has been affected by a hate speech act needs to belong to a group that historically has been offended or been part of a marginalized group. But what about newer act, contemporary act? And finally, I would like to end this introduction part about this overview of possible definitions for the concept of hate speech with the definition provided by one of the most popular dictionaries in Italy, and it's an online dictionary, Treccani, who in 2018 defined hate speech as espressione di odio rivolta in presenza o tramite mezzi di comunicazione contro individui o intere fasce di popolazione. In this case, for me, we are seeing a very generalistic definition of hate speech because we have no reference to which forms of expression we are referring to. There is no mention about the characteristics or the features that people should have for being affected by a hate speech. The only focus is in the mezzi di comunicazione, so means of communication. But even in respect to this concept, we have some issues because we don't know which types of means of communication. And do they have all the same impact across all audiences? Are offline methods or traditional transmission methods having the same impact as online methods? So we have some issues. Before moving to the presentation of my project, I would just like to give you a brief description of the main interest of Italian linguists towards the concept of hate speech in Italy. The major interest of linguists has been shown, especially in respect to the concept of lexicon. And this is understandable if we consider the fact that the lexical part of language is the sphere of language that is in the most contact with the extra-linguistic part of life. So it is most affected and impacted by social and political changes, and it is also responsive to those changes. I will not talk in depth of every study case that has been produced by linguists in Italy in respect to the concept of hate speech. I will only focus, first of all, on De Mauro's study. I will not talk deeply about it, but just mention some key aspects that for me are very relevant for giving a correct picture of the state of the art in Italy. So De Mauro has focused on, especially on lexicon and especially on hate words. He created the concept of parole per ferire, so words to harm. He focused on the fact that words, especially concerning the Italian language, do not arise with a negative and an offensive meaning. They are neutral in origin, but they assume this negative and discriminating meaning or sounding once they are being applied in a specific interactive context or once they are being connected to specific stereotypes or prejudices. And especially they become normalized in the use of the language through repetition and reiteration. He observes that the words to harm can come from different word categories, such as ethnic and geographical terms, references to disabilities, which could be both physically and mental, moral or behavioral flaws, professions and social statuses, and sexuality-related terms. For me, two examples that are very relevant in this list are Americanata and Coglione. Americanata starts as a neutral word to refer to something that is very American, but nowadays it is only used to critique or attack something or someone who's acting in a very flashy way. He or she is being very superficial and is lacking cultural depth. And the other term is coglione, which its neutral meaning refers to the male testicles, but nowadays it's almost exclusively used to refer to someone who's acting stupidly or poorly. And for me, it's very relevant because we can have a clear picture of the real use of language in Italy. Another aspect that has been considered by Di Mauro regards the adaptation of the rules of language in order to produce new words. And especially he refers to the Italian morphology that is very helpful to produce new hate words and to make this lexical category as very dynamic and in constant evolution. So he refers to the use of suffixes, prefixes, and compounds to create new hateful words. Another study that is very relevant is the one conducted by Bianchi in 21. She focuses also on the concept of hate words, and especially on the fact that hate words are not only used to categorize people in specific groups, but they are also used to portray something about our attitude or negative attitude towards a specific category. She mentions the case of terrone, which could be translated as a southern peasant. But in this case, we are not only categorizing all people coming from southern regions of Italy, we are also telling something about them in a very stereotypical way. We are saying that people coming from this part of the nation are less developed politically, socially, and culturally in respect to people belonging to the northern parts of Italy. But the reason why I cited her work lays in the fact that for me, she is broadening the interest of Italian linguists towards the study of hate speech. She's no longer focusing exclusively in lexicon, but she's also considering a more pragmatic approach. She's considering studying hate speech from the perspective of discourse analysis. So this is why she refers not to hate speech, but rather as hate in the first person plural. Whenever we are producing a hateful discourse, a hateful attack towards a person or a group of people, we shouldn't only be considering the impact that this speech act has on the receiver, but we should also analyze what the speech act is telling about about the sender. And this is why she's referring to the concept of othering that has been widely studied by other researchers in the realm of pragmatics and discourse analysis. And she's saying that the sender is producing a speech act that can be defined as hateful in order also to reinforce the speaker's group identity. He's telling something about his membership to a group that is socially and politically more dominant in society. And especially the take that Bianchi is offering to the concept of hate speech is that hate speech is not only descriptive of reality. We are not only describing how reality is, but it's also normative. By repeating a certain word that can be defined as hateful, we are normalizing a certain category in society. And finally, to show how Italian linguists are trying to modernize themselves and try to study the online concept, which is today's topic, I will just mention the fact that lexicon is still being studied in the online platforms. And the main concern of Italian linguists has so far been the fact that the impact of hate speech produced online and its impact on the linguistic norm has proven to be higher in respect to the production of hate speech transmitted through traditional means. I've listed some studies. In this case, we have Ambrisi and Grotti, but we have other studies such as the one produced by Paleta and Dida, Caiani and Retta. They are all showing that there's some recurrent features that can be attributed to hate speech produced online, such as irregular punctuation, inconsistent capitalization. We have a frequent use of slurs and politically charged insults. For instance, in this case, for me, it's very relevant to see how the online system has increased the use of politically charged insults, such as pidiota and pidino, who are used usually to target and attack left-wing individuals in the Italian political discourse. And this is revealing how language is being employed to vilify political opponents. So now that I've tried to give you a brief overview of the background of my research, we've seen that there's a high heterogeneity and sometimes ambiguity in respect to the definition of hate speech. We've seen also that Italian linguists are focusing mainly in the lexical sphere of the language to create hate speech. So we can now approach my research aim. My research aim hasn't been to reject previous definitions, and I'm not so bold for trying to produce a new definition of hate speech. My main aim was to try to find a common denominator across the several conceptualizations of hate speech. And this common denominator for me is represented by the rhetorical perspective and especially the concept of ad hominem argument. In addition to that, I wanted to see and study the phenomenon of hate speech in a platform that is highly likely to produce hate speech, given that the radio show that I have studied openly refers to itself as a direct enemy to everything that is politically correct. Secondly, regarding the linguistic sphere, I decided to focus on discourse markers, which are elements that are typical of oral communication, and I wanted to see how they can contribute in building hate speech and hateful discourses. And the leading question has been, how do people make use of a discourse marker's multifunctionality to construct counter discourses and more specifically to attack and discriminate the opponents? So my research project grounds itself in two main theoretical pillars. On the one hand, we have the rhetorical perspective and the argumentative part. In this case, I'm mainly focusing on an informal approach towards argumentation. And this is not because I'm rejecting the formal perspective, but rather because the informal take is helping me in analyzing hate speech via discourse markers, because I want to consider also aspects linked to the context. And especially I focused on the pragma-dialectical approach, mainly developed by Van Emmeren and Grotendorst, who see argumentation as a verbal, social, and rational activity. Verbal because we are using language. Social because it needs a speaker and a receiver to take place. And rational because argumentation is seen as an attempt to resolve a divergence in opinion. Another relevant aspect linked to the pragma-dialectical approach that is for me very useful or has been very useful is the fact that arguments are constructed through a constellation of propositions. And this means that each proposition does not represent itself an attitude of a speaker, but rather when they are connected with each other and once they are put into a specific interactive context, they can gain a specific value, a specific behavioral value. So the main reason why I decided to focus on pragma-dialectical approach is its context dependency. Every sentence or every proposition that represents an argumentation needs to be studied in its interactive context. And the second reason why I decided to use this rhetorical approach is linked to the conceptualization of ad hominem fallacy, which I'm going to use as a common denominator across the different conceptualizations of hate speech. The ad hominem fallacy is a fallacy of relevance that occurs whenever we are not able to resolve a difference in opinions in accordance to the perspective mainly developed by Van Emmeren and Grotendorst, and especially ad hominem fallacy is committed whenever a speaker is not attacking an opponent's argument based on the content of the argument, but this invalidity of the argument is mainly based on features that are linked to the persona of the opponent. And this occurs whenever we are breaking the freedom rule. That is to say, discussants may not prevent each other from advancing standpoints or from calling standpoints into question. The second pillar in the theoretical frame is described by discourse markers. And in this case, I decided to focus on the functional perspective, given that I'm going to study the different functions of, Okay. Given that I'm going to study different functions of the discourse markers in the text. I decided to focus on the perspective developed by Bazzanella, and this is not because I'm refusing all of the other theorizations, but it's just because I think her model of categorizing the Italian linguistic items into different categories of functions of discourse markers is very valuable. And especially her approach has been widely used in several other studies on discourse markers in the Italian language, both in written and in oral texts. So according to her approach, a discourse marker is to be seen as a word that has a mitigated original meaning to fulfill various tasks that are related with the definition of both a text, but also the interplace structural part. So we can refer to the functionality of discourse marker as a multifunctionality. A discourse marker can have either interactive functions, so it can be used to express the speaker's attitude towards the content of an argument or towards the interchange as a whole. It can also be used in reference to the structuring part of the argumentation, so its function is linked to the construction of a discourse. And whenever we are talking about Bazzanella's approach to discourse markers, we are referring to the term of compositional model. So the original meaning of a discourse doesn't disappear. It's still there. But in order to study its function, we need to consider the impact that other factors linked to the context and the co-text of the text have on the function itself. So now we are slowly moving to the main core of this presentation. First of all, we have the definition of the corpus of analysis. As I said, I've studied episodes taken from a radio show, and especially I've studied 5 episodes that have been taken from the second week of March 2020, and that were part of this radio show La Zanzara, broadcasted by Radio 24. The episodes have been transcribed digitally through systems like HappyScribe and TurboScribe, but thereafter I had to manually fact check them because these tools were facing some problems whenever the speakers were talking over each other's, and especially when the callers were talking in dialects. So I had to intervene. So more about the radio show. The radio show has a name, La Zanzara, which in English means mosquito. And the title is not original of the radio show. It has been taken from a student newspaper that was created in the Liceo Parini in Milan in 1945. This student newspaper is mostly known for an article that was published in 1966 titled The Position of Women in Italian Society. And this article caused a lot of scandal in the Italian society because it was containing female students' opinions and judgments on sex education and premarital relationships. So as this article, the creators of this radio show wanted to produce scandal in the Italian society, and La Zanzara is a metaphor for something that is annoying us. And especially in this case, the problem is created by the topics that are being talked about in the radio show. So the radio show La Zanzara, that I said is broadcasted by Radio 24, has as an explicit purpose to provide a free zone for its audience or callers to talk clearly and freely about everything, about every topic that is concerning political issues, social issues, cultural issues, without fearing censorship. And as we can see by the description provided by the radio program online, we see that the program puts itself as an enemy towards everything that is linked to the concept of politically correctness. The research question has therefore been, in the analyzed episodes, is it possible to identify DMs that contribute to the creation of hate speech? And here we have some nice pictures of my subjects of study. I have 4 categories. First of all, we have the hosts, we have the main host of the show, Giuseppe Cruciani. We have David Parenzo, who is the co-host. And finally, we have Alberto Gottardo, who is the third co-host. And I think it's necessary to mention that Alberto Gottardo is no longer part of the show since 2021 because he has been accused and condemned for incitement to illegal acts. And the fourth category is presented by the audience, or better to quote the host of the program themselves, the actively debating audience. So the ones who are actively debating during the show, but also the ones that are sending voice messages to the program. And in order to be in line with today's topic, I decided to produce this image through artificial intelligence. But going back to the hosts, there's something important that should be mentioned about them. And it is the fact that in this show, they are not only leading the discussion, but they are also acting specific social roles. Giuseppe Cruciani is representing the typical ideas and views of the world that can be linked to the extremist right parties in Italy in a very populistic way. David Parenzo is enacting the values of the upper bourgeoisie belonging to the left parties in society. And finally, we used to have Alberto Gottardo, who's acting as a bridge between the two hosts. So he was moving from the right parties to the left parties. But he had one red thread across all his discourses, and it was his very populistic rhetoric. And the audience, as I said, is both the ones who are calling, live debating, and also the ones who are sending voice messages. So now we are finally to the part of the discussion regarding the results. The presentation of the results is divided in two sections, or I decided to divide the presentation in two sections. In the first part, I will discuss the discourse markers that I have encountered that are connected to the construction of argumentation or to the expression of the content of arguments. Whereas in the second section, I will be talking about the discourse markers that have a function that can be linked to the construction of hate speech or ad hominem argument. So first of all, I encountered a high amount of the discourse marker CHOE, which is being used in the same amount across all the subjects of study. And especially I noticed that usually this discourse marker is being used as a refiller, as a reformulation device, if we follow Bazzanella's approach. So it is usually used to maintain the turn or to suggest discourse planning difficulties and reformulate statements. But there's something interesting in the use of CHOE that I noticed. It is being used as a reformulation device across all categories, but especially by the audience sending voice messages, this becomes very clear. As we can see in the following example, the voice message contains CHOE 4 times, and the speaker is trying to put forward better and better versions of his argumentation. Thereafter, we have also a high amount of modulation devices, and especially I found many modal adverbs, which were being used both by the main host Cruciani, but also by the audience in order to take a step back in respect to the endorsement of a certain sentence. The host Cruciani, in this example, is not sure about the content and the validity of the argument that he is putting forward, and therefore he uses discourse markers such as evidentemente, evidently, and praticamente in practice, which if we think have an opposite meaning. They're not being vague, they are very concrete. They're trying to underline evidence, but in this case, they are being used to produce vagueness and ambiguity. And the same occurs in the following dialogue, where we see especially the caller Antonio, who's using modal adverbs as discourse markers of modulation devices. He's using praticamente, sicuramente, and giustamente. And can notice his uncertainty, especially in the first sentence, because he has been thinking for a while about contacting the program, but he's not sure about the time. For how many days has he been thinking of contacting the radio show? 4 or 5 days. So the word, the discourse marker, praticamente in this case, is strengthened in its function with the uncertainty in regard to the aspect of tempo. Then we have also turn-taking devices, and in this case we have allora. Allora is especially used as a device to take the word, take the turn, so to start an argumentation. And especially it is used to introduce a new topic, or for me it was very interesting to notice that the main host, Giuseppe Cruciani, was using the discourse marker allora to express that he was having control over the discussion. He was leading the discussion. He used allora in order to push the caller to provide more information about a specific topic, probably a topic that could create some debate and some difficulties in society. But a very interesting, for me, occurrence of the use of the term allora is provided by the dialogues conducted with the callers themselves. Especially the people calling the program were using allora not to take the turn, but to express that they were having some difficulties in maintaining the word. And this is why they usually combined the discourse marker allora with other discourse markers forming discourse chains. Here we have a valid example where Giovanni, the caller, is using allora both at the start and at the end of the discourse chain. And in the middle, we have aspetta, fammi finire, per favore, who are all other discourse markers who are expressing difficulties, and it seems like the caller is begging Giuseppe Cruciani to let him talk to point and let him express fully his opinion. Another turn-taking device that I found is the adversative connotation ma. In this case, ma is used mainly by the hosts to introduce an adversative argumentation. Ma adesso tutti quanti a elogiare i cinesi, ma ti mangiano tutta la merda e ci contagiano, da che mondo è mondo perché sempre. So in this case, ma is used to take the word, but especially to oppose a statement that has been produced before. But a special occasion of the employment of the word ma was found in this discourse, and I think it's a very valuable example because it can act as a bridge towards the next section of discussion. In this case, ma is not only used as an opponent element towards arguments produced before, it is also used to introduce an attack towards the caller, because the caller is being attacked and his opinions are being refused only because he's talking with the Northern Italian dialect, or also because he's getting the citizen's income. So not based on the validity of his arguments, but based on other aspects and circumstances, such as the fact that he's talking in a Northern Italian dialect. And now moving on to the second section, where I will be talking specifically of the discourse markers that are contributing in creating a hateful discourse. First of all, we have the category of fatigue devices. And this is a very interesting case because we can see a high variety across all four categories of speakers. First of all, we have Giuseppe Cruciani, so the main host, and the callers or listeners. These two categories are all using equally the interlocutor's proper name in a phatic way, but in this case to attack. As we know, phatic devices are usually used to create closeness and familiarity based on belonging to the same social group, or also based on facts linked to sharing of the same knowledge and belonging to the same cultural background. In this case, for sure, they are used to create closeness, but especially by using the interlocutor's proper name in a phatic way. Cruciani and the callers are trying to direct the offense to a specific person. For instance, we have these two voice messages. In the first case, Parenzo non ti senti un coglione. So we have the term studied by De Mauro. And in this case, we know that the offense of being stupid is directed to Parenzo and not to Gottardo. Or also the second example, Gottardo, la gente non ti odia, ti disprezza e basta. In this case, we know that people hate and disrespects Gottardo and not Giuseppe Cruciani. But Cruciani distinguishes himself from the audience in regards to the use of expressions like amici miei, caro amico mio, and Davide, oppure ragazzi. In this case, we see that Cruciani is using these expressions in order to create closeness to the host, especially, in order to then attack the listeners or the opponents. In this case, we see that amici miei and caro amico mio are created in the sense of othering, to show that we are a united, socially more dominant group in opposition to a minority that we are perceiving as different because they are not sharing our same cultural background and features. And then we have also the discourse marker die, which for me is very interesting because it is showing the phatic value of closeness based on sharing of the same knowledge. So in this case, the attack is being made and the sender is using the discourse marker die or daisu in order to show that the attack is legitimate. It's normalized because it is based on common knowledge, on common sense. And here we have Parenzo saying, ma è un poverino, dai su. So it is well known that karma, the caller, it is a poor thing. He is less culturally developed. But an aspect or an occurrence that for me was extremely interesting is the following passage, because here we can see that whenever we study a discourse marker, we need to take into account also other features linked to the pragmatic aspect, to the context of the interchange. So we need to consider, for instance, also the use of sounds, music. And in this case, we see two repetitions, daisu e daisu. So the attack is, in this case, being justified by the use of daisu, as we said before. But we have also the music tarantella napoletana, which is usually being used in a stereotypical way to refer to people coming from Naples. So we don't have only the language, we have also the music in this case. And hopefully, I hope that technology will help me. I've tried to put the sound here so that you can hear how language and music combine themselves.
E però dove capita una cosa di questo tipo? Dove è capitata? Sarà un caso? Certamente sarà un caso, non c'è dubbio. Sarà un caso, ma dove è capitata? Nell'ospedale di quale città è capitata questa roba? Dai, su. E dai, su, qual è l'ospedale, ragazzi? Qual è la città? Bolzano? Bologna? No, un tizio ha sputato addosso a un medico e un infermiere. Tra l'altro, un responsabile sanitario di Napoli, che cosa è che ha detto? Ha detto che è praticamente come avere sparato a qualcuno, adesso magari esagerato.
I hope that you could hear the music. For me, this is, as a linguist, this is poetry, because I can see how language is not alone. It can be helped via other features. And then we have the last discourse marker, ecco, and this is used mainly by David Parenzo and Alberto Cottardo, so the other two co-hosts. And they are using ecco not with its usual function, that is to say, as a turn-taking device, but especially to introduce an offense. Or a negative allocative appellation. So we have with Parenzo, eccolo qua il genio del genio, ecco l'ingegnere del giorno. Here we have irony because he's saying that here comes the genius, but in a very ironic way. And also we have ecco il falsario produced by Gottardo. So if we want to sum up today's presentation, I've found many occurrences of discourse markers linked to the construction of argumentation and also to the content of argumentation, such as cioè, ma, allora, the modulation devices. They are being used differently across the different categories. Cioè is used by all the speakers, but mainly by the ones that are sending voice messages. And for me, this is reasonable if we consider that they are using a specific communicative tool. They are sending voice messages, so they have more time to talk freely and further elaborate their statements without fearing interruptions. Then we saw Allora, which was being used by the presenters, but also by the audience. Allora is being used especially by Giuseppe Cruciani to show that he is in charge, he has the power over the discussion. And by the audience, it is used not especially to take the turn, but to suggest that they are having difficulties in maintaining the word. Then we have modulation devices with the modal adverbs, which were being used by all the speakers and the listeners to show that they weren't so sure of endorsing a specific statement. Ma acted as a bridge between the discourse markers that have a value for the argumentation and the ones that have a value for the construction of ad hominem argument. And then we saw the fatigue devices based on the use of the proper name of the opponent with expressions such as caro amico mio ragazzi, but also we saw the use of die, a die based that bases closeness on the general knowledge and belonging to the same cultural background. So I would say that my presentation is done for today. I hope that I didn't annoy you with this huge description about the linguistic take on hate speech. And I look forward to see or hear your comments.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your brilliant and fascinating presentation with a lot of examples. I'm sure there will be questions. Who would like to start?
Thank you. That's very interesting to see what's happening in the Italian sphere. Doesn't seem to be extremely different from what we see in other spheres. I'm a bit puzzled concerning the way that you connect the normative kind of perspective on argumentation with the description that you did. The normative tendencies and rhetorics in argumentation are, of course, highly controversial. And I mean, you always, basically need to ask, who am I to kind of be a judge in order to kind of say that certain arguments or values or criteria are higher or lower? And I wonder to what degree we can kind of defend such a normative position, which hides a very subjective point of view always. It's very difficult not to see that it's, the philosopher speaking or you in that case. And then you presented the material and you listed the discourse markers and explained how they work. And I wonder, how does this hang together? Why do we need to understand how discourse markers work? And what does it tell us about the specific problem of hate speech in Italian discourse? Aren't these discourse markers something you could observe in any discourse?
Thank you for the questions, Johannes, and the opinions. For me, it's very useful, so I can continue to develop my theory. Concerning the discourse markers, they are a typical trait of oral communication in Italy. And we have many occurrences or examples also of the employment of discourse markers in written texts and literature dating back to medieval era. So it is a trait that is typical of the Italian language, especially if we're trying to become similar to the oral dimension. So for me, I didn't want to say that discourse markers are being totally used to produce hate speech, but I think they have an active role in constructing a hateful act. If they are combined with other lexical elements, they have a greater impact. I hope I understood your question right.
But why? I mean, I wouldn't see the theoretical background for such a claim.
No,
Why
for
would
me,
discourse markers be especially important for hate speech and not, I mean, not text, which is relatively free of it?
I would say, why not? Why not consider a discourse marker? Because if we only consider lexicon and verbs, we are leaving aside a great part of the text, and especially an element of the text that is connecting us to reality, to the reality of the exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I mean, it's about creating
A connection with the exchange.
a smooth interaction, kind of signaling positions and the way that people take up their discourse or not. But I wouldn't see how this would help us understand hate speech discourse.
hmm Okay, no, I understand your position. It's a good point, and I will focus a bit more on it. Maybe to reject this position in a few years.
I guess, I mean, what I could see is there's perhaps an effect of authenticity in today's discourses when we talk about politics. The kind of everyday persona is kind of enacted by
hmm
some of the political actors through these discourse markers, and in digital discourse, this is something that that is perhaps more easy because um, I mean you have the audiovisual kind of presence. You can share all kinds of audiovisual material much more easily, and but I wouldn't see that by definition or inherently it would be related to any particular political position or some questionable positioning.
Well, for me, it was relevant because there are many studies proving that the choice of a discourse marker is highly linked also to other social aspects such as cultural background, political formation, gender, belonging. So for me, this was a good bridge or a perspective in facing the concept of hate speech, how we are saying something about ourselves through the use of discourse marker and how this can be linked to other words in creation of hate speech.
I'm just kind of ventilating here. I mean,
No.
um,
For me, it's great because
projecting,
then I have
projecting kind of
something
puts,
to
yeah.
develop.
I mean, maybe, I mean, there's a kind of hidden conflict going on here in the discourses that you
Mhm.
analyze. And you have a conflict between academic discourses, which kind of they kind of eliminate these traces, and they try to come across as more objective without the presence of anybody taking up the speech position in any way. And then you have this kind of authentic speaking between people in the pub or in the street, I don't know, and this is of course a resource in political communication nowadays as a kind of traditional academic approach, which perhaps characterized certain quality print media, is highly challenged.
I'm very thankful for your insights, for sure.
I have a question about the definition of hate speech. You mentioned the Treccani online dictionary.
Yeah.
I would like to have more information. And how would you analyze the means of communication according to Treccani?
This is I'm going back to the definition here. This is the main problem for me with this definition, because it is extremely vague. Are we referring to newspapers? Are we referring to TV, or maybe social network in this case, also Twitter and so on? So this was my main concern with this definition, and I wanted to face you also with the same issue that I was having.
So do you think social media are involved? Are they included inside means of communication, according to you?
According to me, yes, they are included, because I see nowadays that people inform themselves more and more via social media. And they probably, it's also because they come closer to the source itself that is producing an information. For instance, they can see the opinion of a politician directly who's expressing this position via Twitter or TikTok and Facebook and so on. But for me, this was an issue. Mezzi di comunicazione.
Yes, of course, because it is can be understood as a polysemic word.
Yeah.
And it's important to see if we can, for instance, talk about, I would say, multimodality and
Exactly.
different semiotic aspects. I will have another second question about ad hominem fallacy.
Yeah.
You mentioned Johannes' theory of fallacy of relevance. Do you think when you analyze the different radio interventions you had in your corpus, that all these occurrences can be described with this theory? Or do you think it could be relevant for some examples, but not for most of them?
No, probably not for all of them. This was one of my attempts to find a common denominator, but of course not for all of them that were used to create hate speech. But I think that some of them, yes, especially the ones linked to echo, or especially Daisu, where we are legitimizing an attack based on circumstances. For instance, Daisu was being used to legitimize the fact that we are criticizing a person coming from Naples as an unreliable source.
Thank you. Are there any questions for you?
I would just like to thank you for letting me be part of this dialogue, and especially thank you for the feedback. Now I have something to reflect on.
Good. Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation.
Thank you.
So now I have the great pleasure to introduce the second speaker, Professor Johannes Angermuller from Open University. He's a professor of discourse, languages, and applied linguistics at Open University in the United Kingdom. His main fields of research are discourse analysis, linguistic pragmatics, political communication, mass media culture, and methods and theories in social research. He is the founding president of DiscourseNet, an interdisciplinary and international network of discourse researchers. He has published 9 books, 18 edited books, about 40 journal articles, and almost 70 chapters in edited books. He is very active in editing articles. For instance, he is a member of the board of several international journals, such as Journal of Multicultural Discourses, Mots les langages du politique, Langage et Société, and Text and Talk. In his paper today, he will point out the links between post-truth and hate speech. He will focus on post-truth discourses by giving examples with a historical perspective. The title of his paper today is Hate Speech as Critical Discourse for Socioepistemic Approach. Well, listening to you, Johannes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Good, great, yeah. Thank you very much for this invitation and this opportunity to continue our exchange, which we've had for quite a while now. And we've touched on various questions, and it's also been very interesting to listen to Anna's talk on hate speech. I've also thought a bit about hate speech for this talk, even though this is not something I study as systematically and in detail as Anna. I think it's definitely a great challenge to us as discourse analysts, and here are some reflections that I'd like to present to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about them. I want to do 2 things in my contribution. I want to have a look at hate speech as a discursive activity, and also at the discourse on hate speech as a critical discursive practice. That's what I will do in the first part, and then I will have a look, a very quick look at the history of discourse analysis, because I think the question of hate speech and all other critical discourses invites us to reconsider the way that we consider our own history as participants of the discourse that we analyze. I will focus on the French history, and I hope you'll see that this is something that will also apply to other national traditions of discourse analysis. I want to ask what is the discourse around hate speech, and whenever something is flagged up as hate speech, we can see the traces of some critical discourse. I want to point out the dialogical polyphonic nature of any kind of critical discourse, including discourses around hate speech. And I can remind you here of the classical example of Discourse around negation. And Ducrot in 1984, he suggested that negation is not just a kind of inversion of a positive into negative value, but it's rather a kind of dialogue between two positions, between 2 voices. One of them saying something, like the wall is white, and somebody else rejecting that first voice. So dialogue is basically what negations is about, and it's not about kind of a semantic content that is inverted, and it's not like a mathematical formula turning a positive value into a negative one, but it's enacting a certain dialogical spectacle between various voices in discourse. Ducrot used this example, the wall is not white, because precisely you wonder, who the heck said that the wall is white? And And this kind of reminds us that negation is normally about negating somebody or some position that doesn't necessarily have a name. So negation is a quite efficient device at times in order to kind of refer to somebody else's position without revealing the name. And it's crucial to see that it's about an interdiscursive relationship between somebody saying something against somebody else saying something else. If we take examples of hate speech here, I just collected two of them, and I think it would be really fascinating to have a closer look at the way how the different positions are organized in Anna's rich material. The first example here on the left, I mean, this is the kind of classical idea of, I mean, hate speech. Some people say something, and this would be the allocutor here in Ducrot's model. And then the observer, the analyst in a way, the person kind of giving the label of hate speech, he or she is the locutor, kind of qualifying that other discourse as hate speech. So while this is not negation, we can also see this kind of relationship between a position saying something against another position saying something else. This is very fundamental for any kind of critical discourse. Whenever you have critical discourse, you have this relationship between somebody saying, and especially somebody saying something in the name of something like truth, general values, or democracy, things like that, against somebody else who's presented as deficient in those values. Now, the interesting thing is that this kind of critical relationship between a position of truth against a position of, well, untruth or non-truth or less truth. This is, of course, something that can be applied to all kinds of different discourses. And the hate speech discourse we just saw in Anna's talk was, of course, a discourse coming from the left liberal center. But the right has appropriated the same kind of relationships and uses the same devices, as we can see here on the right. If you have a close look, this is about people protesting against the woke agenda, the so-called woke agenda. And here somebody is claiming free speech, speaks in the name of freedom, that's kind of truth position, against those people who cite hate speech as their kind of discourse. So this is also, of course, a critical relationship between some people saying something against somebody else, and of course we can find all these kinds of critical relationships in all kinds of discourses. Are you following me? This is very banal, and probably you'll say, I mean, why is this interesting? I mean, this is just, I mean, too kind of banal. Now, if we reflect on that critical practice that you could see here in discourses from the liberal left center or from the extreme right, critical discourse is, of course, a very kind of ubiquitous discourse. You find it in many kind of areas, not only out there in political discourse, but also in our own discourses. I mean, our own discourses are also by definition critical. There's all kinds of critical practice going on. And the question is how to take critical discourse as an object of discourse analysis. Now, one thing I think which we should mention here, of course, is that you always have this kind of relationship between some people speaking in the name of truth against some other people presented as non-true, untrue, ideological, problematical, whatever kind of inferior kind of values they might represent. So you find this kind of collective projection in a way. It's not just the speaker, but from the position of truth, of course, there's a certain community that is projected against another community. So there's a tendency to present this relationship in terms of an antagonism between two positions in society. The other thing is that every discourse, of course, has a subject. I mean, there's no discourse that we can produce that doesn't point to somebody speaking, as it were. We all kind of use language in order to kind of make visible the speaker. I mean, there's no way that we can use language without visibilizing somebody that is presented as, well, maybe not the author, but at least the origin of what is being said. And in terms of critical discourse, we need to think about that subject position that is always kind of evoked in any kind of discourse in terms of an epistemic position. Ducrot and many linguists, they have thought about, of course, the way that the semantic relationships can be defined in the light of these polyphonic dialogical positioning. So there's a certain kind of idea of a social kind of context that is mobilized through these kind of dialogical devices. But I think we should also see them as epistemic positions. I mean, it's not just about social identities that are created or rejected in discourse through these devices, but there's all kinds of epistemic hierarchies that are flagged up, shown, epistemic positions that are kind of constructed in discursive struggles over truth. So it is a very important thing to see that all discourses, of course, are about defending a certain subject position of truth. And that's something which is probably quite universal. And finally, this is a practice, of course, which is ongoing. It's not something that is restricted to specific, very critical discourse analysts or specialists of normative argumentation. It is something that, of course, will take place in all the discourses that we analyze as well. So we don't have a monopoly on how these critical kind of negotiations of epistemic positions takes place. We are also always involved in these struggles over truth as discourse analysts, and therefore we are kind of embedded in this kind of world where everybody kind of defends a certain subject position. I want to come to the second part because the main point now will be that if we talk about hate speech as a critical practice, and if we talk about any kind of critical practice, and almost anything we deal with in political discourse is critical, then we always need to reflect on our own subject position of truth in the academic discourse that we are producing and that we're part of. There's no academic discourse that is, as it were, neutral. It is deeply tied up with all kinds of relationships that are constructed between positions of truth and positions of untruth. And so, of course, I mean, it is always crucial to think about how the whole discourse of hate speech and about hate speech is itself a discourse. So there's no neutral way of observing hate speech out there. We're always already within a discourse which is part and parcel of that critical relationship. And if I have the time, I'd like to give you a very quick kind of, well, history is perhaps a bit too much, but I want to start with the problem that we've had in discourse analysis since the very beginning. And I cite here one of the pioneers of French discourse analysis, Michel Pecheux, who was a Marxist, who got into discourse analysis in order to reveal the kind of ideological processes, the dynamics of creating subjects in a capitalistic society, to understand how people produce certain ideas and believe in certain things under the conditions of class struggle. And so what we have here in this very classical discourse analysis of the very first years in France is a strong critical discourse. And the critical discourse is very visible because, of course, Pecheux was very explicit that he defended a certain epistemic position, and that was that of Marxist theory, which is equated with a position of truth from where he speaks in order to deal with all kinds of political discourses, the way that workers think and talk about their economic situation, whatever. So we have, and I think that's very obvious for anybody who has a look at this early kind of activist discourse analysis. There's a critical interdiscourse between a subject of truth, of course, which is kind of aligned with Marxist theory, and everything else, which is either ideological, that is bourgeois, represents the interests of the capitalistic classes, or conscious workers. And they're, of course, in a way, those with whom the subject of discourse aligns, because the workers represent a higher truth, a truth which is better than the knowledge that is shared by the bourgeois side. So what we see here is a certain kind of critical discourse where the observer aligns with some subject positions that are analyzed in the discourse that is at stake here. That is, of course, something which has been criticized. There are very good reasons to say that this is a problematic kind of critical model, because finally it presents a certain political value system as universal, and it doesn't really allow the reader to question that kind of political background, and in a way it kind of imposes a certain ideological agenda on the reader, and that's what many people felt. I'm not saying that this is a good or bad model. I will come to other models right away. What I want to say is there is a problem to the degree that the discourses that are analyzed as ideological are not really analyzed in the same way as the discourse that is presented as true. Because in this discourse, and I think that's the problem of this kind of activist discourse, the discourse analytical explanation is only applied to the side of ideology and never to the side of truth. So Marxist theory in this case is presented as something outside the discursive field in a way. It is kind of a higher or kind of non-discursive truth that the discourse analyst can just mobilize in order to kind of then project onto the discursive objects, and show that other things are discursive, and therefore the workers believe in stuff that is not really good for them, but this kind of critique does not allow us to really make the critique itself an object of discourse analysis. Okay? Around 1983, this paradigm, if we want to, fell into crisis. And in the years after, we saw the rise of all kinds of other names in French discourse analysis, which are much more historical in their thinking. I mean, more kind of relativist in a way. We can think of names from Dominique Magnaud and Patrick Charodeau. There's Ruth Amoussi as well. She is a great specialist of argumentation in the French-speaking world, but very is by far the dominant strand in linguistics and in discourse analysis. So these discourse analysts, they of course reacted to the problems, the kind of reactions towards the first kind of phase of discourse analysis, which was activist, and their solution was to create a new kind of critical model, a critical model which deals with discourses. And which basically sees everything as ideological, more or less. For this kind of critical, discourse analysis, there's no need for the subject of truth to align with any subject positions analyzed in the discourse. So, in a way, from the perspective of the observer, everything is equally true or false. There's no real kind of difference in terms of epistemic quality. The subject of truth, the discourse analyst, in a way, restricts him or herself just to observing without judging. That's the kind of idea of this relativist strand. Of course, it's a huge kind of development in the whole social sciences and linguistics to kind of do away with this kind of moralizing critique that had dominated not only among left-leaning Marxists, but there were lots of right-leaning theorists in up to the 20th century in the traditional humanities. And so this kind of relativist paradigm does not allow the observer, the discourse analyst, to align with the epistemic position of anything they analyze. Okay? Act of neutrality, objectivity. The observer seems to disappear, and I mean the big kind of figure here is perhaps Michel Foucault, who analyzes one power knowledge system and then another power knowledge system across history, across space, and they all have the same quality. There's no kind of real hierarchy that the observer would defend. There's no kind of higher knowledge that would be closer to the position of truth that the observer implicitly defends. Everything is kept at a distance, and that's of course a very kind of powerful model, which is not only something that has been practiced in science, and I think some people would even go as far as to say that this is the scientific posture. I'm not sure about that. I don't agree with that. But what we can definitely see is it's also something that many journalists would adopt, this kind of neutral position from where everything is equally good or bad. That's of course something that in quality news media would very much dominate. Now that's a second phase in French discourse analysis. And let me just mention, without going into any details, that the history in other countries was different. German discourse analysis had the same kind of turn towards relativist critique. But there was definitely a rise of activist critique in the UK and Latin America since those years. And so the history of discourse analysis would need to be recounted in a very different way. And now let me get to the end. And you're still wondering, I know that, I mean, why is he now talking about the history of discourse analysis? Because the relativist regime is also coming to an end. With the rise of hate speech, with the rise of fake news, with the rise of the post-truth age, the implicit critical relationship between the different participants in discourse, and especially between the scientific observer and the empirical discourses, again changes very, very significantly. And that really reminds us that discourse analysis itself is embedded in a critical discourse. We are not just kind of coming from a universal kind of background. We're really part and parcel of critical discourses that we sometimes also analyze. And now what we can see since 2016 is a clear kind of change of discourse. And I mean, you have basically all picked it up that the journalist, of course, has a very different position nowadays. He's no longer the objective presenter of the right and left position. He or she is a fact checker. So I mean, there's no way that the journalist can remain neutral if certain political actors, I mean, have a strategy of plastering the whole public sphere with lies and inventions. So the journalist takes a much more explicit position. That has changed definitely within very few years. And that also really challenges our position in discourse analysis as objective observers. For discourse analysis to believe that we can kind of objectively assess all positions without positioning ourselves is, of course, a very problematic idea nowadays in this kind of critical discourse that we're going through now. So in a way, the discourse analyst again is invited to kind of also act as a normative actor, as a citizen in a way, who also takes part. However, I think the critical model that is emerging here is very, very different from the first phase that we saw with Peugeot, with Marxist activist discourse in the 1970s and 80s in France. What we see here is, first of all, an awareness that our own discourse is part of a historical regime of critical discourse. We're not kind of outside discourse. I mean, we are a very important part of the discourse we're analyzing ourselves. That's one thing. The second thing is that, of course, in any discourse, and in our discourse as well, there's always a subject of truth. Without a subject of truth, you don't have critical discourse. Any kind of speech act, any kind of utterance looks out for a speaker who's always also a position of epistemic content. I mean, it's difficult not to kind of engage in the struggle over these kind of positions without um, uh, without ourselves being part of that discourse, which represents a subject of truth. And finally, I would say that it would be time to recognize that, of course, I mean, we can analyze the discourses out there in terms of the social epistemic positions that are in conflict or that align with each other. We can understand how we participate in these kind of um, um, fact checking um, and correcting discourses about everything that we see as problematical in ongoing populist discourse. But at the same time, we are very much able to also see that our own discourse works in the same way. I mean, there's no way that that we are outside of the very practices that we're analyzing, which precisely consist in creating relationships between a subject of truth and all those other positions that are presented as less valuable, and so we can and should definitely apply this perspective on ourselves. And I think that's a plea for reflexive discourse analysis that sees ourselves as part of critical discourse and in critical discourse, and that is also able to apply the very tools that we apply to others to itself. So we no longer have this kind of asymmetry between discourse analysis, which only analyzes other discourses, that is, ideological discourses, and implicitly drawing from a kind of universal truth or kind of some divine knowledge that kind of is outside knowledge, outside discourse. We recognize that we are right into these struggles and that we analyze both sides equally. So that's my suggestion for some critical discussion now.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for this fascinating panorama of critical discourse analysis. Maybe I could start with one first question about the relativist turn in German discourse analysis. Could you please give us more examples and illustrations about it?
Well, in Germany, you have the very pioneers of discourse analysis were critical discourse analysts, called kritische Diskursanalyse by Siegfried Jäger and Margaret Jäger. It was a couple. They have or had an institute in Duisburg, and their idea was to reveal the hidden kind of discriminations, especially against Jews. And there's a long tradition to work on the kind of hidden fascist connotations in some discourses that that appear to be quite neutral and kind of everyday kind of mainstream. That kind of approach was there from the 70s, and I think they occupied within the linguistic space the term critical discourse analysis until the 2000s when I started. I mean, I started in the 90s, and they were quite present as an approach, and of course they were hugely controversial. Basically, they discovered anti-Semitism in all kinds of discourses, and people who who were told that they're anti-Semitic, they were not at all kind of amused about that. Linguists, other linguists were highly critical of that approach because many thought and still think, me included, that it's a way of kind of, presenting a certain kind of agenda without being quite clear about it, and kind of directing quite big arguments, quite big critical arguments against people who may have said things which are much more ambivalent, perhaps, and in many ways this can be seen as a kind of denunciation of people who are absolutely not responsible for that kind of hate speech. So this really kind of made critical discourse analysis, gave a quite bad reputation among many academic but also non-academic colleagues who became the target of these analyses. Jäger and his group, they had a kind of semi-academic institute where they produced these studies. They weren't, I mean, he was a professor, he had a professorship, but they were pretty kind of on the margins, definitely not very much integrated into the discipline. And so there was this kind of big antagonism with the rest of linguistics. And the rest of linguistics since the 90s, 2000s has come up with so many other kind of approaches. I mean, German discourse analysis is huge, very productive, lots of very, very different approaches. You've got lots of analytical things in order to kind of account for this or that aspect of discourse. There are lots of different definitions of discourse in many ways. I mean, discourse is not even a basis for them all because they have different ideas of it all. Yeah, so I would think that since the 2000s, that kind of original critical discourse analysis has definitely been kind of going down a bit, given that the more academic colleagues have been extremely productive and worked on so many different aspects of discourse.
Thank you very much. So there is a proliferation of theories for critical discourse analysis in Germany, but also in other European countries, or just in Germany, according to you?
Yeah, and what happened in the UK and the Commonwealth space is in a way a very kind of long and ongoing activist turn, and in the Anglophone space, discourse analysis is basically defined by that group of critical discourse analysts, those canonical people that you all know by name, I guess, Ruud Wodak, Fairclough, Van Dijk, kind of hyper-cited leaders of that field, and they defend a model that is quite close to the one that I presented here with the name of Michel Pecheux. Even though, of course, I mean, they're not Marxists, there wouldn't be any kind of Marxist truth claims. So it would still be a kind of a different critique, perhaps. I mean, I think it would be interesting to kind of have a closer look at the critical model implicit in critical discourse analysis. And but what you definitely have, and that's, I think, what shows the proximity of critical discourse analysis with Pecheux is the asymmetry of explanation between discourse analysis used as a toolbox in order to account for ideological discourse, but structurally, that kind of critique is not open towards criticizing itself in discursive terms, because the arguments and the theory that is cited in order to criticize certain racist discourses, for example, they're taken as a taken for granted evidence, taken for granted knowledge, and also as a kind of philosophical value system that doesn't need any kind of discourse analytical explanation. It is just true. So there's no need to kind of reflect on how truth is made in the discourse analytical space. So that's why I think there's a huge difference between these early tendencies in France and in the Anglophone world, and the more relativist critique that we can associate with Foucault, for example, which is also critical. I mean, it's not true that Foucault and these more social sciences oriented people are not critical. They just have a different relationship between the position of truth and the way they relate from that position to the other positions in discourse. And this has been extremely powerful as a figure, of course, as well. I mean, and you have many people who have done wonderfully critical studies of all kinds of things with that model. It's not as moralizing, it's not as explicit. The position of truth in that relativist discourse is normally hidden away, and that's a problem because it is there. And there's no point saying it's objective if it also comes from a position of truth. So I mean, they all work in certain ways. But I think what I really wanted to kind of drive home here is that we can account for all these kind of critical tendencies in discursive terms. And discourse analysis should kind of radicalize its own approach by making itself part of the analysis. And I think there's no way that we can go on with an analysis in a political context where our position is challenged by populist anti-science people all the time, and saying that I mean, like the activists who, oh, yeah, we just have our truths. That's something that populists would, of course, embrace as well. I mean, we just take some external authority and criticize everybody else. That's of course highly problematical and it's very easy for the populists to replicate. But it's also very difficult to kind of go on with the relativist critique because precisely the subject of truth is something that is very easily taken out of the critical reflection, as if it was an objective position. And of course, it is a crucial part of the discourse because the whole analysis, the whole critical analysis of anything in political discourse would be impossible without the relationship between the observer and their position and the other positions. So that's the kind of political problem I have now, and I think we should make ourselves the object. Sorry for doing my talk again. I talk too much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Some more questions from the audience?
Maybe good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your speeches. They were very interesting. And my question might be a bit naive, but also provocatory in a way. I wonder, how would you position yourself as a discourse analyst who takes into account its place, if I've understood it correctly, as a citizen academic. How would you do that, for example, in your works, like concretely? I don't know if my question is clear.
I mean, this question, I mean, one way to respond from the background of my talk would be to say, I mean, we always do that. We always position ourselves. I mean, whenever we talk about other discourses, we produce and participate in another discourse on that discourse, and that's why, I mean, it might be a bit difficult to control that, and we might come up with certain claims of being of that or this or that political camp, for example, and then of course, I mean, what we see all the time is that our positions are taken up and then used for different purposes, and there's some right-wing people who use Gramsci nowadays, and so I mean this can be turned around very easily. So I mean, one response from my kind of critical reflexive kind of approach would be, yes, let's acknowledge that we are a central part of the critical discourses that we analyze and criticize. So there's no critique without our own position. And our own position is not totally in our control. I mean, the idea that we kind of have a certain value system that we can just impose and express without any kind of loss of meaning, and I mean, we are ourselves an object of these discursive dynamics, which create us as subjects, and I mean, we're not just a product of what others say. I mean, we have our part, but it's dialogical, so we don't control at least 50%, because the others will react and create ourselves. That is, I think, maybe the more complex and, well, reflexive answer. And I guess you wanted something more concrete and on the ground. And I mean, in very concrete terms, I'm extremely concerned with the fake news explosion, and I mean, especially the last few days, especially concerning the way that things are turned around and the lies that disseminated. And I think we need to kind of defend the idea that there are kind of moral differences. I mean, everything is not the same. There's hierarchies in discourse. There's epistemic hierarchies that that we should sometimes defend. Now, that's something which I didn't talk about that much in my talk here, so that comes perhaps a bit of as a surprise here. But the background of my work is the kind of turn towards kind of total propaganda that we've seen from Donald Trump and Brexit and all these kind of populist projects that that mobilize a great deal of manipulation, and to get back a sense of truth into discourse analysis and to recognize that everything that we say in discourse is not the same, and some things can stand the test much better, and that that of course, I mean, some things are true and or truer than others, and others are just plain lies. And the relativist discourse analysis that we've had over the last 40 years is not really well equipped to responding to this new situation. And so yeah, I I want to make this case for a social epistemic approach where some knowledges are indeed higher than others.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much. So, what you're saying is that also discourse analysts should, in your opinion, in this reflexive approach, become fact checkers themselves, right? And in a way, also claim that.
I'm not sure that this is really the response. I think, as I said, perhaps implicitly a bit, fact-checking itself is a critical practice, but it's also a very kind of limiting, problematic practice in many ways. And who are we to kind of decide on the value and the truth of something? What I would say is we should be aware that in discourse we always deal with epistemic inequality and epistemic values which are not the same. That does not mean that anybody of us, and certainly not I myself, have any kind of privileged access to the higher knowledge. I mean, we should start to understand that, of course, in discourse, we deal with all kinds of value hierarchies. Everything is not the same at all. But that doesn't mean that what we happen to say and think is at the top, and that we can kind of claim special authority to express the highest values. I mean, that's what I would definitely kind of reject. I mean, I can't do that. Nobody can do that. I think it would be very problematical. And what we can do is we can reflect on the fact that not everything is the same, and we can, of course, make claims that some things have been established much better than other things. And if you say that that the Earth is flat, you will go just so far, right? And other models which have come up with the laws of gravity, with all kinds of scientific theories, they have proven so far much better to account for so many things in our world. And yeah, but that's not from the vantage point of a privileged kind of observer. It's like let's recognize that there is stuff that is true or truer and less true or just plain lies, without putting ourselves in the position to decide on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it's much clearer. Thank you.
And I guess there's a tendency in critical discourse analysis to kind of pose as a fact checker. And I find this unsettling a bit, because in many ways this can be very banal. I mean, we know, I mean, that kind of discourses against immigrants are bad. And in other ways, it can kind of create and denounce problems which are not fair to the people that are at stake here. So I think we should be very careful, and we should not compete with the journalists who can do that much better. We should carve out our own space and defend the social sciences as a space where we can talk about these things without committing to a certain value system, and we can have a conversation without, from the outset, agreeing on this or that political position. And otherwise, I wouldn't see the point of what we're doing here.
Thank you very much. I think I will just say a few words to conclude the session. Both talks today emphasize the different theoretical approaches to critical discourse analysis. This session has also shown the need for ongoing research on hate speech due to the diversity of semiotic material involved. And also, as you said, Johannes, the dissemination of alternative facts needs to be tackled, and this will probably fuel another session of the seminar next year. Once again, I want to warmly thank our speakers, Anna and Johannes, and the audience for today's session. Thank you so much to everyone, and see you soon for other sessions of the seminar.